today's industrialized THC is harming many, many families. Welcome to the Every Brain Matters podcast. It's just pot. What's the problem? I'm your host, Aubrey Adams, and director of Every Brain Matters. A has joined us at the Every Brain Matters community today because she wants to share her story, how marijuana impacted her family. Well, thank you, A, for joining us today. We've decided to keep your name and your identity private to protect your family. And that's a very valuable thing to do when a family is in recovery. Could you share a little bit about what your family life was like prior to marijuana coming in?
Sure. My son and I were always really close. He was just a very kind, compassionate, loving child, very outgoing. He wanted to be involved in everything from a young age. He loved being around his friends. He had the same group of friends actually since preschool, if not before then. So, just we were from a small town, very good group of friends, and just very active, very social, just the most compassionate, kind, loving kiddo you can be around. And so I always said I was so fortunate. He was such an easy kid, to raise. He made it so easy.
And then when did you see his behaviors start to change?
I saw some changes his freshman year of high school. And then I really started to notice bigger changes into his sophomore year. And the main thing I started seeing was just the isolation. That was not like him to want to be in his room all the time or not come down and interact. And then I started noticing a lot of depression. And, there had been some trauma in his life, probably a year or two before his freshman year of high school. And so in the beginning, I kind of thought this is depression from that. He had suffered some loss, but it was the deepest depression I had ever seen. As someone who worked in mental health, I just couldn't understand what was going on. I could hardly get him out of bed. That's when I started to see him not taking care of himself, not eating. Tried getting him into therapy at that time, and he just refused. It was almost making it worse. And then by his sophomore year of high school, he was failing. He was failing school. He had always been an honor roll student, very bright young man, without really even having to try most of the time. And I couldn't understand, what do we need to do? Why is this all of a sudden happening? Is it the transition to high school? And it just progressively got worse. With his grades, he stopped hanging around the same group of friends he had his whole life. I started noticing just some changes in his behavior when I was around him. But I had no idea marijuana was even in the picture. So I was thinking this is a mental health problem. We are severely depressed, maybe, even past the point of depression, looking at other diagnoses. And it was extremely hard to figure out for the longest time. And then I found the marijuana. And I started reaching out to professionals, to mental health professionals, to recovery professionals in our area. And everyone kept saying, no, that's not marijuana. Marijuana doesn't do that. And that's not marijuana. That's not what it does. And I'm like, well, something's happening. And by the time I forced him, literally, I forced him, this was probably his junior year, I had to do something. I was losing my son. And I took him to see a psychiatrist. And at that point, I think that's when the psychosis had started. But they were saying, well, this could be bipolar. This could be, severe untreated depression. We did not know. We did drug test him. And he said, you're going to find THC in there. That's it. Like, I was convinced we had moved on to much harder, what we think are much harder drugs, just from his behavior. He was very paranoid to the point he didn't trust me anymore. I mean, I was the person he used to come to everything, and now he didn't trust me for anything, let alone trying to take him to someone that's going to tell him this is a problem. We have a problem.
So he went from isolation, severe depression, and then showing symptoms of psychosis. And you described paranoia. Was there other behaviors that you were seeing? And then the lack of trust with his own mom, that's a key too. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. And I couldn't understand what was happening. It's like, I'm the person you've come to your whole life for anything. Like, I've never lied to you. I've never betrayed that trust with you. And he was terrified. I could see how scared he was. And there was a point where there were some voices. He told me there were some voices, and I think that really scared him. And we were also at that time trying some different medication for his mental health. So it's hard to know. Was it a combination? Was it the medication? Was it the marijuana? Well, finally, he refused to take any medication. I mean, he was so paranoid that he was not going to take anything prescribed by a medical professional. And that's when I knew this was more than a side effect of a medication, because this psychosis just progressed.
Yeah. And hearing voices is a classic sign of marijuana-induced psychosis. And I think that the world doesn't understand that. So thank you for bringing
Absolutely.
that up. I didn't know that either. And like the hallucinogens, like the LSD and the shrooms, you get more visual hallucinations. But when you have the auditory hallucinations, the voices, that is one of the classic signs. So I can imagine how scared your son was hearing voices that weren't there.
Right. And it was such a struggle to determine, is this a mental health problem? Because when we started this journey 2 years ago, a lot of the professionals I took him to could not believe marijuana was causing this. But also, what I didn't know at the time is he wasn't just smoking marijuana. He was using, the dabs and the industrialized, extremely high strength marijuana. And it wasn't until I searched, I had to do several searches of his room when things were really, really bad. And it was terrifying. I was finding things I didn't know what they were.
Were they like the vapes and stuff you were finding?
The vapes, the dabs, the wax containers. I was finding straws, burn up straws, and I just had no idea. So I joined online support groups, and other parents helped me, identify the dab and explain to me what these high concentrations of THC were. And that's really when I realized we have a big problem.
So what did you do after that then, when you acknowledged that we have a severe problem here and THC is the cause of it?
Yes. I knew if I was going to survive this journey, I had to help myself. I was losing it. As a mom, I was losing it, because I often say nothing shows you the unhealed parts of yourself like a child in addiction. And so I knew I had to start reaching out for help. And so the first thing I did was I found a therapist and I started working through my own trauma, my own history. And I also was fortunate enough to find so many different resources online, including Every Brain Matters. I started working one-on-one with a parent recovery specialist. And she was a godsend. I mean, my therapists were a godsend in my life. And she taught me what I needed to do to get out of my son's way, to stop enabling him, to let him take his journey, but yet have a plan. Have a plan when he's ready. How are we going to help him? And it was terrifying. I mean, I couldn't have done it without those women in my life and those resources. But I think the first thing a parent has to do is find your support.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. And you know, what you've done and the choices you've made to say, I need help first, that takes a lot of courage and strength. So,
and I think as a parent, we hit our own rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was trying to force recovery. I was trying to force therapy, you know, and what I was doing was pushing him away from me. I thought I was trying to save him, which I was, you know, but I was doing it from fear, and I didn't have the resources I needed. But, you know, like addiction, we hit our own rock bottom and realized what we're doing is absolutely not working and it's not helping.
And so what was the change? Did your son end up going into treatment?
He did. It was just a few months into his senior year of high school. I got a call from a police officer telling me he had been busted at school. Someone tipped them off and they brought the drug dog in and searched his car. It was probably the worst phone call. Not the worst. It's not the worst phone call, but it is not a phone call you ever want to get as a parent. And thankfully, I said, if you're willing to go to treatment, it's here. It's available. And for the first time, he was willing to talk to a treatment program. But, you know, treatment programs are hard to get into. They're like 30, 60, 90 days out. And by the grace of God, they called me 3 days later and said they had a bed. And the next morning, you know, he was starting to get really scared by then.
They changed their mind fast.
It's terrifying. I mean, I wanted to change my mind a million times on that 9-hour drive we had to get to treatment. And I just thought, if we get there and he goes through with this is going to be a miracle. But by the time we got there, he was getting real angry. You know, we were starting to have withdrawal. That night was awful. We had to stay in a hotel because I took him the very next morning. So that night in that hotel was awful. Watching him go through the withdrawal, he couldn't sleep. He was angry. I didn't know what was going to happen. And so it was a miracle that he went.
Now, you mentioned earlier about what we thought were the hard drugs. Mm-hmm. Witnessing your son go through psychosis and severe depression, and then seeing the withdrawal he started that night. Did you think marijuana was a soft drug after that, or what are your views on that?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I knew once I realized what we were actually dealing with, you know, once I found the evidence, I started doing my own research, you know, on what this was, what it was hard to believe that something that contained THC could totally change someone's life like it did. But I was watching it in front of my face every day. And I was watching it get worse every single day. And there's no doubt in my mind. But I think even at the treatment center, they thought he was doing more than THC.
Yeah.
They did. They told me. They told him. And I watched people that went in there on hard, what we call hard drugs, the marijuana, the fentanyl, and they are hard drugs. They recovered faster than my son by far. After 75 days of treatment, I couldn't even bring him home because he still mentally was not anywhere close to being recovered.
It's a really good point you are making right now. And that's something the world does not understand. Mm-hmm. And everybody who's just co-signing and promoting these products, these state-approved products mm-hmm. that are so potent, so different than old school marijuana, you are literally saying it took longer and it was harder for your son to recover from a marijuana addiction, or what is called cannabis use disorder, than somebody who's on fentanyl or even meth.
Yes, because it clears their system so much faster. My son was still testing positive for THC for over 60 days, and he weighed 120 pounds. Marijuana is fat soluble. It's stored in their fat. There was no fat in that kid's body because part of the addiction was he did experience some periods of what I believe was the hyperemesis. He would never admit that. Maybe he would today. I don't know. But he just quit eating. He was 5'9", 120 pounds. So emaciated in his face. It was just heartbreaking.
So here's another good point that I hope the audience understands. What A is describing here. When you look at somebody who's emaciated, very thin, you think meth, you mm-hmm. think heroin, you think fentanyl. We are talking about addiction to THC, cannabis use disorder, that is so toxic that people are vomiting, they're not eating, their addiction is so strong, maybe they're choosing not to eat, they'd rather just ingest the drug instead of putting nutrition in their body. And we need everybody to hear this. This is a new era. This is a new time. This isn't some low potent joint. These are highly concentrated vapes, dabs, shatter wax that these young people are consuming. And it is literally destroying their mental and physical health. This isn't a soft drug anymore.
And a lot of the research will show, especially what the industrialized THC will do on the undeveloped brain. So our brains aren't fully developed till the age of 25. So the likelihood of these kids experiencing psychosis and all of the side effects we're talking about are almost guaranteed if you consume it long enough.
Another great point you're making, because that's what I say when I do presentations. If your teen or young adult is using these products consistently, it doesn't even have to be every day, but there's a consistent, regular use. It's not a matter of if they will have a severe consequence. It's just a matter of time. And that time period is shorter and shorter and shorter now. It can happen within a few days, a few weeks.
And I think, too, what our kids hear on social media is so much different. We don't see the advertisements our kids are seeing. They're being told, oh, this will help with your anxiety. This will help with your depression. This will help you sleep. Well, it might, for a little bit, but then you're going to be so dependent on that medication to even help you sleep. My son is 8 months sober and is still having to take something at night to help him go to sleep. because
Love
it's
that
just
good point.
depleted every neurochemical in his brain that he needed to feel happy, to feel joy, to feel any emotion whatsoever, and to regulate a normal sleep-wake cycle. When he stopped using, his body couldn't do any of that on its own anymore. And they are not telling these kids this. They are not, I mean, they're glorifying what it can do, and they're making it look like a sugar-coated candy, you know?
Yeah. And that's, and just, I mean, each point you make is just so valuable and so important for everyone to hear. You know, you're describing that your son's natural circadian rhythm, where you go to sleep, or the reward system of the brain was destroyed.
It was absolutely destroyed. And it was so heartbreaking to see him sober and in recovery and working for recovery. And he just would say, I can feel no joy. I feel nothing. He was so depressed. And I know you've talked about this, other experts, will say 3 months in recovery, it's rough. It gets real rough because you get so depressed because your body is no longer making those chemicals for itself anymore. It's devastating.
And this is why families need to understand that this recovery process, especially from what we're calling industrialized THC,
yes,
is so long, because I mean, I've seen it with my own son, and then I've hosted youth in recovery in my home that are recovering from cannabis use disorder. Some of them had psychosis, and like you said, the depression is so severe, and they're at high risk for self-harm,
absolutely,
suicide, and it takes a whole community to make sure that youth or that young person is surrounded by people that've got their backs and understand it's rough. So there's going to be some mood swings. There's going to be severe depression. And how are we going to work through that? Like, this is hard work, not only for the individual, but for the family and everybody around.
Yeah, it's all hands on deck, really. Yeah. You can't do it alone. And it's so important to find the right resources too, which can be extremely difficult. And there's just so much needed for recovery and long-term recovery, to give them a chance at long-term recovery.
Yes.
And I think a lot of research is showing, they're like, the first year, it's going to take a person up to a year for their brain to fully recover from the industrialized THC.
Yes.
And I'm just now starting to see it in my son, 8 months in, and I'm starting to feel like the kid I always knew, that you always know as a mother, as a parent, they're in there. But it took over 7 months to start to see that again. I'm so glad. No short fix.
Yeah. No short fix. Yes, that's what. And I'm so glad he's starting to come back. And I can share a little bit of experience, in our recovery groups at Every Brain Matters. Our one counselor always says, some of us are further down the road, but we're just as close to the ditch. Yes. And the first 5 years of recovery are considered, short-term recovery. Long-term recovery doesn't really kick in until 5 years after. And that's with some of the water-soluble drugs. So the hard work comes years after. And I'm praying for your son. And I'm so glad he's feeling better, and that he's coming back. And the hard work comes, even it was in the beginning, the middle, and now, because they start to feel better and they're like, okay, I can use again.
Yes.
It's normal. It's medicine. It'll help my anxiety. And, knowing that it's just an intoxicant, it numbs them up. It's not helping anything. And so this is where parents, their work is never done. It's keeping their foot on the gas pedal, doing their own recovery program. It doesn't go away after a few months because the culture is going to call them back, you know?
It's a scary world out there for our kids. It is. It is a culture that's becoming, so accepted and so normalized.
Kids have to work really, really hard to stay away from it. Like, recommend to the young people listening to this, develop your own kind of groups to go have fun. I know my younger son, he has a great group of friends that are sober and they're always having fun getting together. So if they can maintain that and support each other.
Well, and one thing I can say for my son, he stopped having fun when he started using. He didn't leave his room. That's the sad thing is I think it's a way to come out of your shell when you're an adolescent, but it's about to take all that away from them and they don't know.
They don't know. So it's interesting that you describe that too, because when I go talk to people that are very pro legalization, very pro drugs, they say it's all about freedom, man. Aubrey, you're trying to destroy our freedom. Why are you taking our freedom away? And what you're describing is your son lost his freedom.
He lost all of it. Absolutely, he did. Even his freedom to think. The first thing he said when I picked him up after 75 days of the inpatient treatment was, it's crazy how I can wake up and plan my day now. I couldn't do that before. I couldn't think that far ahead. It was wake up, get high. Think about the next time you're going to get high. That's it. And try to somehow maintain a normal life so people don't understand the severity of what's happening. That it controls your life.
I think it was Dr. DuPont that called it chemical slavery.
Yes, it is absolutely chemical slavery. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that it's not just in the underdeveloped brain that people are developing psychosis. You're seeing more and more older adults into their 30s, that are developing psychosis from the industrialized THC. So it just shows you how harmful it is to the brain.
Thank you for saying that. You are absolutely right. These products are not proven safe for the developed brain, the adult brain, and adults deserve to know that to make informed decisions. And they've been sold a bag of lies that it's safer than alcohol and okay to use, and it's natural. It's not natural anymore.
It's not natural.
Mm-hmm.
It's not natural anymore. I wish they had to change the terminology, because when you say THC or you say marijuana, everyone thinks they're smoking a joint from the 70s. This is the furthest thing that you could get, from the marijuana people smoked in the 70s.
Yeah. And even that marijuana was harmful. So
exactly.
No wonder we have so much, and I'm not saying it's the only factor, but we have a lot of violence. We have a lot of mental illness. We have a lot of people harming themselves and harming the people around them. Absolutely. And families like ours know that this new era of industrialized THC is a major factor in these changes and the deterioration of our communities and our families.
Right. This was something, I never thought would ever be a part of our lives. Never.
Yeah.
And now it's like people have to know the dangers. They cannot believe that this is not going to impact their life. They at least have to have the correct information to make the decision for themselves.
Yeah, that's everything you say is such a good point. I call that not my kid-itis. I had it too. I remember thinking, we raised him right. He won't touch this stuff.
Right.
And I lived in Colorado when they legalized. And I'm like, that won't affect my family. It destroyed my family.
It
That's really
absolutely
what
does.
happened. Yeah.
And it's just, as a parent, it's one of the most terrifying things you can watch. I felt like I was a firsthand witness to my son destroying his life, that I knew he no longer had control over. The addiction had taken over. And nobody talks about that side of THC.
So there's the elephant in the room. So parents, family members are at high risk to harm themselves or self-medicate.
Yeah. Everyone needs support. You are not going to recover from this without a lot of support from people who are educated on this, industrialized THC, and a lot of recovery for the entire family as a whole.
Yes.
And not everyone's going to choose that path. Not everyone in your family is going to be on board, but the one thing you can do is help yourself.
Yeah.
That's where your power is helping yourself. And slowly but surely that changes everything for the person in addiction too.
It sure does. And I was in this really kind of important meeting early on in my recovery, and I was sitting in this room of recovery professionals and advocates, a big coalition, and they had asked me to come share with them a little bit about my story. And I was listening to their meeting and all the activities that they were doing to promote recovery. And this therapist got up there and she's like, I have the answer. She's like, I know the answer on how to get your loved one into treatment, how to get your loved one into recovery. We've got it. We've got it. And she did this whole build up. And I was like on the edge of my seat. I'm like, what is it? Tell me. I'll do anything for my son to feel better, anything for my husband to feel better. And I was just like, I wait and wait. And she just kept building it up like, oh my gosh. I was like, tell me already. Tell me. And she held up a sign and it said self-care.
Yeah.
And I was like, darn it. like
this
really?
Was not what I wanted. This was not the easy button.
I do not want to turn the focus on myself. Like, I don't want to do that.
It's some of the hardest work you're going to do. Mm-hmm. The hardest, but also the most rewarding.
Yes. And we can promote some groups out there like Al-Anon. We have Maranon now, MAR-ANON.com. It's for loved ones who have been affected by another one's marijuana use. And Every Brain Matters has support groups too. NAMI is another good one. PALS, Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. Yes. And do you have any other ones that you recommend?
The therapist, the family addiction therapist I worked with, they used a lot of the craft method.
The craft method, yes.
And that's probably, I think I used everything, honestly. It was just throw everything in the pot. We're going to give it everything we have.
Yeah. I think parents go to a lot of support groups, and if they don't hear what they want to hear, they're like, oh no, that's not going to work for me. Or if they hear somebody talking about they don't agree with, they're like, oh, I'm not coming back to this. That's, they get their tail feathers ruffled. And in the world of recovery, we learn, take what you like and leave the rest. Right. You're going to learn something from every support group, from every professional, from every parent or somebody who's walked this journey. You're going to learn something. So don't close your doors.
I think it's those stories that get us through. I mean, it's a story no parent ever wants to sit and tell, but it's what gives the next family hope and the tools they need to walk through. But I'm so glad you said that, because you may join a meeting and think, this is not me.
Yeah.
In today's world, we're so fortunate there's a meeting you can join every hour of the day online. You don't even have to leave your home anymore.
Yeah. And we even recommend attending Marijuana Anonymous meetings so you can hear the other side, so you can hear the voices of recovery. So if you go to marijuanaanonymous.com, make sure you pick a meeting that says open meeting. That means anybody can attend. And there were a few days that I went back to Marijuana Anonymous meeting because I was so low. I was so in my head about my situation and not accepting it. And they reached out to me, they helped me. It was amazing. And then Marathon, I run a group every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Central Time for people who have loved ones that have experienced cannabis-induced psychosis. And it's a great group. Oh my gosh. I just look forward to that meeting every week. So join us if you want to come. So right now, everybody is doing well, is what I hear. Everybody's doing okay and still recovering.
We are recovering. Yes. I'm so thankful for that. And I know everybody's journey is so different, on this path, but there's always hope. There is always hope for recovery.
Thank you for saying that too, because I think even if they get a diagnosis of chronic psychosis or schizophrenia, there's still hope. There's still
absolutely
tools to use to.
Absolutely. And I think it's just so important to find the right professionals to walk that road with you, that know how to treat this. And it's not a linear journey. There are highs and there are deep lows for family and, the person with addiction, but we just keep going.
Yeah, we learn the tools we need to keep going.
Yes.
And so what is your message to, and I know we were talking more about your story and recovery, but what about advocacy? Are you upset with the policies being passed in this country in regarding to marijuana?
I am, because I feel like the legislators don't fully understand what this is. They would never pass a bill to sell meth or, anything like that in a gas station. That would never happen. But yet we can go into a gas station, our children can go into a gas station and access these things that are so incredibly harmful, as we've talked about. And not understanding the ramification, not having the education is the most harmful part of all of it, I think. I don't think anyone could understand what industrialized THC can do to their loved one and say it's okay to sell it in a gas station.
Yeah. Yeah, and candies and sugary vapes, right? And
make it look delicious.
Yeah.
And it's almost glorified, it is almost being glorified, and we're going to have big problems.
Yeah.
We are having big problems.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I hear you, because we know, because we recognize it, because we've lived it.
Lived it. Yes.
And every time there's another shooting or just horrific, my heart just sinks. Like, I wonder, was that person using this industrialized THC? Because we know that, I know you've experienced this, like, my loved ones would have never had these behaviors if it wasn't for THC.
No, they lose total control of their emotions, their thoughts, their behaviors. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
It is terrifying. And as mothers who have lived this firsthand, your heart breaks every time there's a school shooting, every time there's violence happening, and you just have to wonder, is that part of it?
Yeah.
And when they're testing, this has always been a question I have, when they're finding THC, associated with these events, how are we ever going to differentiate between what people think is marijuana and call this what it really is? As industrialized THC. It should never be considered marijuana anymore.
Yeah.
It is not marijuana.
Yeah.
I mean, not what the public believes marijuana is.
Yes.
Somehow we have to change the way this looks so people understand what it truly is.
Yeah. And as adults of this country, we can make the change, and we must make the change.
Yes.
We can't keep going down this path. So, voices like yours are so important. You bring hope and clarity and connection. I'm blessed to be connected with you now. You've helped me tremendously, and I know people listening to this interview, you'll help them too. So thank you.
Thank you. I hope so. That's my goal, to bring hope and save our kids.
It takes a lot of courage to come forward and share this experience. We need your support. So please make a donation to Every Brain Matters. Join our community. Share and like this podcast and leave us a good review. We need your help and your support to raise awareness on the harms of marijuana and the drug culture expansion. Thank you. Every Brain Matters is a community of support and advocacy based on science and lived experience. Visit us at everybrainmatters.org.